The room fell silent as the colonel's boot slammed onto the cold, tiled floor. His hand gripped her head with terrifying force, pushing it down into the toilet. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the stifling tension in the air. She could feel the rough edges of the porcelain against her skin, the cold water rising around her face, and the whispers of the others standing by. But instead of breaking, she did something no one could have predicted, something that would haunt the colonel for the rest of his life. This wasn't the first time she'd faced brutality, but it was the first time she'd been pushed this far. Standing tall, her name was Captain Clara Reynolds. She had joined the military in her early 20s, driven by a sense of duty and a desire to protect. But the world she'd entered wasn't the idealized one she had imagined. In a system built on rank and power, respect often felt like a currency only the strong could afford. She had learned that the hard way. Clara had never been one to seek attention. She wasn't the type to boast about her accomplishments or her sacrifices, but her silence often made her a target. Those who saw her quiet demeanor as a weakness were the ones who underestimated her the most. As she knelt there with the foul water beginning to pool around her face, the weight of years of injustice bore down on her. She thought about all the times she had stood up for others, only to be ignored, ridiculed, or worse, punished. But this was different. Clara had been through worse. And what the colonel didn't know was that she was about to show him something he would never forget. Clara had always been a fighter, even before she wore the uniform. Growing up in a small town, she had been raised by a single mother who worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Her mother, an immigrant from a foreign country, always taught Clara one thing above all else. Dignity is your greatest weapon. No matter what you face in life, no matter the obstacles, you must always hold on to your self-respect. When Clara turned 18, she didn't waste time. She enlisted in the army, determined to prove herself. At first, the military was a refuge. It was a place where her worth was determined by her actions, not by her gender or her past. The discipline, the structure, it suited her. But soon the reality of military life hit. She was constantly underestimated, even ridiculed by some of her male counterparts. There were whispers behind her back, mockery in her face, and hands placed on her shoulder with the suggestion that her place wasn't in the front lines. The colonel, one of the higher-ranking officers, was one of the loudest voices in these mockeries. She had seen enough to know that the higher you went, the more power seemed to corrupt. The colonel had a reputation for cruelty. His power trips were legendary. He enjoyed breaking people, particularly those who dared to challenge his authority. And though Clara had faced his arrogance before, this time it felt different. This time the colonel had crossed a line. Clara's thoughts flashed to the loss of her best friend, Mara, who had been lost in combat years earlier. Clara had watched Mara die in her arms after a firefight that went horribly wrong. Mara had been strong, always pushing forward with her head held high, never asking for special treatment. The grief from losing Mara was something Clara still carried with her, like a weight in her chest that never quite left. And now Clara was in this position, pushed to her breaking point once again. Her body ached, her breath was shallow, but her mind was clearer than it had ever been. The colonel may have thought he was in control, but Clara knew something he didn't. Power wasn't just about strength or force. It was about who could hold on when everyone else expected you to break. Clara wasn't the only one who had suffered at the hands of the colonel. There were others, soldiers, who had been humiliated, belittled, or punished for reasons that made no sense at all. The system had a way of turning a blind eye to the mistreatment, as if it was just a normal part of military life. It was easier to stay silent, to ignore the cries for help, to pretend like nothing was wrong. But Clara wasn't one to keep her mouth shut when she saw injustice. She had spoken up before, even when it cost her, and the consequences were always the same: more isolation, more punishment, and more reprimands that seemed to come from nowhere. Her superiors didn't listen when she raised concerns about the colonel's behavior. Instead, they brushed it aside, claiming that his actions were part of the tough love necessary to mold soldiers into warriors. To them, Clara was just another soldier who didn't understand the chain of command. And so, when the colonel pushed her head into that toilet, it wasn't just an isolated act of cruelty. It was the culmination of years of systemic neglect, of a culture that valued power and control over humanity. It was a test, a way to remind Clara that she was nothing more than a pawn in a system that cared little for her well-being. But Clara wasn't like the others. She wouldn't bow to intimidation, and she wouldn't be broken by cruelty. She had fought too many battles, both external and internal, to let someone like the colonel defeat her. As the colonel pressed harder, forcing her head deeper into the toilet, Clara felt a surge of anger rise within her. But it wasn't just anger. It was the quiet, unshakable kind of anger that came from years of pain and injustice. She didn't scream. She didn't fight back with violence. Instead, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes, summoning all the strength she had learned to cultivate in the darkest of times. The others stood around, watching, some too afraid to speak up, others too indifferent to care. But Clara didn't need their help. She didn't need anyone's pity. She needed only her own resilience. She could feel the water rise around her, soaking her hair, her clothes, the remnants of dignity she had left. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had a plan. She wasn't going to be the one who broke today. She wouldn't let the colonel think he had won. The colonel's grip faltered for just a moment, a slight hesitation that only Clara noticed. It was a tiny crack, but it was enough. Clara's strength wasn't in her physicality. It was in her silence, in the quiet defiance that refused to be bent. Then it happened. Clara's hand, slick with water, shot out and grabbed the colonel's wrist with a force that surprised him. For a brief moment, time stood still. The colonel's eyes widened, and a flicker of uncertainty flashed across his face. He had expected to break her, but in that moment, Clara wasn't just a soldier. She was a symbol of everything the system had tried to crush. With a strength that came from years of enduring the unendurable, Clara twisted his wrist and shoved him back. The colonel staggered, his face turning red with humiliation and anger. And that was when the others, silent until now, began to move. First, one soldier stepped forward, then another. The murmurs of support grew louder. The colonel's eyes darted around, his authority crumbling with every passing second. Clara had done it, not with force, not with words, but with the quiet strength that had always been her greatest weapon. Strength doesn't come from how loud you shout. It comes from how still you stand when the world tries to break you. The strongest soldiers don't fight with their fists, they fight with their hearts. You can break the body, but you'll never break the spirit. The colonel, now visibly shaken, stepped back, his reputation shattered. The room fell into an uneasy silence, but it was no longer one of fear. It was a silence of respect. Clara, soaked but unbroken, stood tall, her back straight, her eyes locked on the colonel's. One by one, the soldiers in the room turned away from the colonel, their gaze shifting to Clara. They didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about rank. It was about honor. And Clara had just won the greatest battle of her life. As Clara walked away from the scene, she didn't look back. She knew that the fight wasn't over, but for once she had felt something she hadn't in a long time: respect. In a world that often rewards those who shout the loudest, Clara reminded us all that true strength is found in silence. It's found in the quiet moments, the ones that test our resolve and show us who we really are. What happened that day wasn't just a victory for Clara. It was a victory for all the silent warriors who never sought recognition. Where are you watching from? Share your thoughts below. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of strength. resilience, and the power of silent defiance.